particularly Seattle, and those visiting from other states, responding to this invitation at a relatively shorter notice to have this audience with you, kusema jambo. I must thank Festus for the effort to reach out to you. It's true it was a relatively very short notice, and I think we even made efforts through the Global Diaspora One Voice Consortium with Dr. Chiuri and Dr. Ndiangui to be able to reach out to those who could be able to make it to this gathering. And it's true, like Festus is saying, that some hotels that previously you could have used were not readily available for such a gathering. But I'm happy to see you. And we wish you the best. And even as these festivities start, may the Lord's hand be with you and see you through Christmas and the New Year. And we'll come back to Seattle and the larger part of Washington State to engage with you as appropriate. I was here in Washington State with Madam 𝐉𝐨 Amaya and my two colleagues, Mr. 𝐜𝐴𝐻 David, who deals with matters diaspora and education, and Mr. Ng'ong'a, who is our trade attaché, who deals with the matters trade, investment, tourism, and the likes. We had a meeting on Thursday with the president and CEO of the Seattle Metropolitan Chamber of Commerce, and also with the president of the Washington University and other officials from the mayor's office on promotion of interests that Kenya have on matters trade, matters investment, matters education. And it is of interest to note that Washington University has a lot that is University of Washington has a lot that is ongoing with Kenyan institutions back at home, including the University of Nairobi and even Aga Khan University, on matters research and other exchange programs that are useful to us as a country. Would like to enhance those collaborations, those interests, to serve our people back at home. Commercial diplomacy is a significant part of our engagement these days. We are interested in attracting as much as possible more investments from the US to Kenya. And we are also interested in having Kenyan goods exported to the US in this large market that exists here. So we are looking for ways and means of increasing our exports from Kenya to the US. We have also looking for more American investors, as I said, back at home. Kenya, the government, through its initiative on improving the welfare of the people of Kenya and increasing wealth and employment, has been active in creating increasing the ease of doing business in Kenya. In fact, the last time we moved from number 112 to number 56 in 2019 as a country that had improved a lot in ease of doing business. We have several investment opportunities in the field of ICT, in manufacturing, in housing and real estate, in agriculture. If you mention agriculture, the desire is we're looking for investors that can also help us in agro-processing. What would be the interest? We export a large number of raw materials from Africa to Europe and to the east and even to the west in America. But we'd be glad if we are able to increase both the volume of exports, but also the value of our exports. And in working about the value of our export, the desire is to do value addition and diversification of the products. So that when you export tea, you export coffee, you export even titanium and the likes, you should be able to process, add value, get more money for your people than selling coffee from a bulk auction or tea from a bulk auction, and then somebody else goes and adds value and even does the labeling, and with that one they fetch much more than the rural farmer who has toiled a lot but is not getting much. These are areas where you as the diaspora have an advantage of knowing the Kenyan situation and also the American situation in which you live. The diaspora becomes and has always been a very significant partner of the government of Kenya in its national development agenda. Over and beyond remittances. When it comes to remittances, we value the contribution of the Kenyan diaspora because as at now, when it comes to Forex, diaspora remittances comes number one, much more than what tea or coffee gives Kenya. It creates stability back at home. And in fact, if you look at the total figure as at of October, just 2 months ago, the diaspora remittances for 1 year, from October last year to October this year, was worth $3.02 billion billion dollars, not shillings. Out of those $3.02 billion, 59% was from the United States, the Kenyans who live in the United States. So you are the most important contributors to Kenya in terms of diaspora remittances. And yes, the young Kenyan. And so the government has mainstreamed and included even in the Kenyan foreign policy diaspora as a pillar of our engagement. And so we value your input, your suggestions, your usefulness in matters of human resource development, attracting of tourists to go to Kenya, because there are no great ambassadors than yourselves when it comes to convincing your American friends to visit Kenya. Those that may be having reservations or doubts, if you tell them, no, let's go together. First time you'll go with them, they'll pick courage, they'll get reassured, they'll get to know of Kenya that most people don't know, those who have not visited. Next time they'll now go back on their own because they know the terrain, and as a result, what keeps most countries' tourism industry going is repeat tourists. Those that have been there, they know the place. If there's a travel advisory, they know the difference between that the advisory covers that part of the country. The rest of the country is free. Those that have not gone, when they hear that there's a travel advisory, they think it is covering what? The whole country. But we're happy that bilateral relations between our two countries continue to grow from strength to strength. As at now, the travel advisory on Kenya is at level 2. Would be glad if it improves much better. But that allows American citizens to visit Kenya with full insurance cover. And the US was actually our largest source of tourist arrivals before COVID. The US had overtaken the United Kingdom as a source for tourist arrivals, and we'll be glad if we can partner with you as things improve, to be able to have more Americans visit Kenya to sample the positively unique tourist attractions that we have in our country. And so we recognize the diaspora. And that is why when you visit a city like this, when there's an opportunity, you engage with the diaspora. Now, apart from diaspora, from the perspective of being channels through which we can be able to reach out to the larger constituency here on matters trade, matters investment, matters education, matters of even advocacy of Kenya's values and Kenya's stand, we are also conscious of services that should be rendered to the diaspora. And efforts are still being made to make services be more cost-effective, more friendly, because it took me 5 hours to fly from DC to here. Now, to fly from DC, from Seattle to LA, or from Seattle to Washington, DC, for a passport or an ID becomes a very expensive thing for most of our diaspora fellows. Recommendations are on board, and we are hoping that with the discussion still at the level in the ministry, that would be able, God willing, to increase other consulates, so that with more consulates, our diaspora can get consular services nearer to them than what is currently obtaining. At least the LA office is able to offer full services now on ID processing and passport. The New York office has also started now to do passports and ID, but we have made recommendations for 3 other cities in the US, including Seattle, to be one of the centers that should be considered for purposes of having a consulate, a full consulate that can be able to render those services. But meanwhile, we are also in the process, we are hoping soon, that we can be able to have mobile biometric machines, so that instead of all people moving, say, from Seattle to come to DC or go to LA, we can send once in a while an immigration officer to come to a center like this and attend to your numbers. Instead of each one of you paying money to go to DC, it is cheaper to send one person to come overboard. But these are services that we think is important for you, and we should be able to at least get a mobile biometric processing machine by the beginning of the year, God willing. But meanwhile, the immigration officers are still able to serve you, and we've always sympathized when we go through the office and you find somebody came all the way from Seattle for the ID processing and passport processing. For now, I think we processed quite a number, but as Mr. 𝐭𝐡𝐢 was telling you, we have 2 of our immigration officers, Mr. Moses Omwago and Mr. Wamela, are joining us by video link on Zoom, so that if you have any questions on whether it was an ID processing or a passport issue that perhaps has delayed, or you followed up, it has not come back, if there are such issues, instead of me saying I'll look at it when I go back to DC, I said it is important that they are here with you virtually, so that you can have an interactive session with them as we are here, to be able to see what else can be resolved. Would have been joined by Mr. Mongare, the immigration officer in LA, because LA covers here as one of our consulates, but Mr. Mongare was bereaved, actually lost his mother yesterday. So we have his 2 colleagues, Mr. Moses Omwoma and Omango and Mr. Wamela, covering in. Mr. Ndegwa, which a good number of you know, is also in another consular work with another Kenyan community in Oklahoma. in Missouri. So we are here for that purpose, to be able to engage with you, get to know one another, and also create a forum where after you've met like this today, next time we have a meeting, at least this should be easier to reach you. And we don't organize the diaspora, but we facilitate the work of the diaspora. The diaspora are free to form their own groups, their own associations, right? Which makes it easy for us to work with you. But as to how you do it, that is your jurisdiction. We don't interfere as a mission. But it makes it easier for us when you have an umbrella body under which you can be able to offer these services. But Kenyans being Kenyans, sometimes you may not get one body. But whatever the case, whichever formula you use, we are available for you. Just for information also, the Constitution of Kenya recognizes your right to voting. And there are provisions for diaspora voting. For the time being, it is only for presidential elections. And so in the last election, 2017, countries of East Africa plus South Africa were allowed to vote and to vote for presidential elections. This year, they have added 8 other countries, including the United States, UK, Qatar, UAE, and the likes. And so, as the commissioner, one of the commissioners of IEBC, Mr. Justice Nyagaya, and his team visited Washington, D.C. last week, not last week, this week, early this week, and we had a diaspora meeting, virtual, and they visited the embassy also in D.C. Then on Monday, they left for New York, had a meeting with our consulate in New York and the Kenyan mission to the UN in New York, and thereafter moved to California. And they had their meetings yesterday. All these are in preparation for voting, possible registration of voters, and subsequent voting in August next year. And so the only challenge is that the Act indicates that polling can only be in consulates or Kenyan missions abroad. And at the moment, we only have 3 missions. The embassy itself in Washington, D.C., the consulate in New York, and the consulate in LA. So the IEBC, and you know this IEBC, one of the I stands for independent, but they work with us. The IEBC is in charge, but the mission is there and ready to facilitate the IEBC as much as they require to enable them do registration of voters. They are planning, I think for those of you who might have joined some online meetings, they are planning to do registration of voters from mid-January, I think for about 2-3 weeks, up to the end of January, in preparation for voting, which will be in August next year. The IEBC, I believe, will partner again with us. We told them that we need to have like a town hall meeting. Last time we had a town hall meeting with Kenyans. I think we had over 500 on Zoom and another 1,000, no, not 1,000, another 500 on YouTube. Together we had about 1,000 people. But you see, there are time differences. If it is 9 o'clock in Washington, D.C., upper Kwenu is 6 o'clock in the morning. So we have to do those balancing acts. But we suggested to the IBC that it would be important to have town hall meetings. If you can't have one common one, but then we could have the ones by zones. So that, for example, the Pacific Coast could have their own meeting, separate from the one from the Northeast because of the time differences. But I just wanted to mention that preparations are ongoing with the IEBC to engage with the diaspora. This particular time, they're doing what they're calling mapping of possible stations that could be designated as polling stations for purposes of elections, which will be in August next year. So I thought it was good to mention to you about that aspect, and we hope that the IBC will give us further information, and they are engaging with diaspora groups. If there is a unit or a diaspora group here that feels that perhaps other engagements the IBC has had so far has not included your group here, if there's a channel, I mean, if there's a need, we could be able to arrange with the IBC so that they can have a dedicated session for those that have not had that opportunity. For purposes of registration, they require a passport, and they need a Kenyan passport to be able to vote. They don't need an ID because it specifies that for purposes of voting of the diaspora, for the diaspora they need the passport and not the ID, because there are a good number of us that have passports but don't have the ID. And to get the new passport, the requirement these days is you should also have the new generation ID, si ile kubwa ya zamani. And so for anyone preparing to register as a voter, it is important that you validate your passport, because it is what will be used for purposes of voting. But as I said, maybe we'll need another town hall meeting with the IBC so that questions that perhaps could arise should be answered, but we are available to be able to receive whatever you need. In conclusion, since I didn't want to make it a lecture, that's why I asked if it was around the table, we have a chance for people to contribute. The other aspect that I wanted to let you know of is that Kenya-US relations continue to grow from strength to strength. And what we have had as normal bilateral relations was elevated in 2018 when President Kenyatta visited the US and had bilateral talks with President Trump in 2018. It was elevated to what we call strategic partnership. And in that strategic partnership, they identified subsequently 5 pillars for implementation of that strategic partnership under what we call biannual strategic dialogue. The 5 pillars that were identified for purposes of promoting or enhancing Kenya-US relations, number 1 was economic prosperity, matters trade and investment. And we've done a lot in that area. The second pillar was the pillar on defense cooperation. Kenya and the US continue to collaborate and cooperate on matters defense, matters counterterrorism. The third one is on governance, civilian security, matters of democracy, human rights, and rule of law. We partner with the US and work with them in issues of interest to Kenya. The fourth one was on cooperation on matters regional and multilateral. And then the last but not least one is on the pillar of health. And on health, and a good number of you are in the medical field, the US remains our largest bilateral partner, in the sense that in the medical field, no other country supports Kenya in the manner in which the US does. If you look at it under the PEPFAR, that is the President's Emergency Response for HIV and AIDS, the US is the largest contributor to Kenya's programs towards reduction of the challenges of HIV and AIDS. And that has been there for decades. And then you also have PMI, Presidential Malaria Initiative, also from President Bush. The US continues to support programs for prevention of malaria in Kenya and is a larger donor. These days we see a larger partner of Kenya, whether it is HIV and AIDS, whether it is malaria, whether it is reduction of infant and maternal mortalities. The US still ranks high, together with tuberculosis. So we are a major partner, they are a major partner of Kenya on the field of health, not forgetting that even for COVID, the US is the largest contributor of vaccines to Kenya to combat the COVID-19 pandemic. That is a challenge now in the country. In fact, up to last week, they'd given 4.6 million vaccines through COVAX and directly through bilateral assistance. And just yesterday, they released another 2.2 million doses for Kenya. Our challenge now back at home is for you to try to convince our brothers and sisters in Kenya to help us remove the vaccines from the stores so that they can be on their own. It is like the sub-region is having a fifth wave. It is easier to manage, or it is manageable for those that have got boosters or got second doses than those that have not been vaccinated. If you can help convince your relatives and your friends to take the vaccines, is good for you and good for them. Because some of them end up losing their lives, and they were the real breadwinners for their own communities, for their own children. If you have your debate and you have your reason, the Kenyan law doesn't force you to be vaccinated. Right? It's left voluntary. But if you are to choose to say you don't want to be vaccinated because of those beliefs, and you extend the same even to polio, if you say you don't want your children to be vaccinated and they get polio, that child will blame you for life. So if it is within your influence to convince mama na baba na brothers and sisters back at home, the issue now is not availability. We have more than enough vaccines in Kenya for those that are in need. Lakini kama hapa kwenu pia muko na ya kutosha, lakini kuna wengi pia ambao wataki kudungwa sindano. Lakini hapa, unlike kule kwetu, at least medical facilities are relatively better off than kule nyumbani. Hata kupata oxygen za nyingine inaweza kuwa shida kule kwetu. So why wait if you have an opportunity to get the vaccine, so that even if you get infected, doctors like Dr. 𝐬𝐴 will tell you, Dr. 𝐬𝐴, she didn't introduce herself as a doctor, but she's a medical doctor like her sister. The reaction would be milder on you than one who has not been vaccinated at all. But I believe I don't need to take much time with you because I'm speaking to the converted. So you don't preach to convert those already taking part in Holy Communion to be baptized. So may I only request that at a bilateral level, we are trying our best to improve for the benefit of Kenya, but on the medical side, when it comes to vaccines, supplies are now reasonable from several quarters. But as a country, our desire now has been not just to be recipients of vaccines. It is our desire to partner with public and private sector. For example, the US, if we can be able to partner in the manufacture of vaccines and therapeutics, just like Kenya was a partner of Oxford University for the development of the AstraZeneca vaccine. We did that. So we have demonstrated through KEMRI that Kenya can be able to go that extra mile, and will be willing to partner with others so that we can have locally manufactured vaccines within our own territory, and whatever can be for our country and the sub-region and beyond. And I'll cut the long story short. because the main aim was to meet, also hear from you, so that when I sit down, if there are questions or suggestions, I'll be willing and ready to hear, with my colleagues also here, so that next time we come, we hope we'll come when COVID situation will be relatively much better, and Dr. Gumbo and team will not be forced to kufikiria juu chini tutakutana wapi, when hotels are hesitant also to have large numbers of people meeting the way we are doing today. And so we also had in our meeting with the mayor's office enhancing the collaboration that exists. We have Mombasa and Seattle having what they call sister city collaboration or association. These are facilities that are around here, and some of us sometimes may not be able to know, and they have a large team of volunteers. And I think it's good to engage with them. And Dr. Gumbo attended 1 or 2 meetings. I think it's also good to establish those contacts that you can use for the benefit of the local Kenyans here. It's good so that where there is a need, you can call us to come from DC, come and join you in activities that would be for your own benefit as Kenyans, and also for us as a country. So, wacha basi niketi chini so that I give you a chance to ask questions or give suggestions, and also to release you on time, because I realize it is almost, we've done more than what? We've done more than an hour, and this is America. But let me conclude by saying I'm very grateful to have had this opportunity to meet with you, and also for the reunion I've had with some faces that I saw many, many years ago. And I also didn't intend to make Grace look too old. But just because there was just a road separating our home from my home. Just a road. And by coincidence also, our parents happen to have been pastors. So you saw me in attire. I went to church, but I didn't get a chance to go. And I'm looking odd. All of you are in your casual, and I'm in this one. Next time I'll behave like you do. Thank you very much. And Mama Janet and Mama Angela, we had you. We followed closely with Dr. Gumbo and others, even when the funeral home wanted the no objection letter. The mission, of course, was able to release, to facilitate the repatriation of the remains. May Almighty God continue to give you comfort that human beings cannot give, and full recovery for your daughter. And I must thank the Kenyans for the solidarity you exhibited when the calamity occurred here in your city. Kwa haya machache basi, wacha niketi chini, na kama iko maswali tutaipokea. Asanteni sana. And as I said, Mr. Wamela, the immigration officer based in New York, and Mr. Moses Omwago, the immigration officer who is with Mr. Ndegwa in DC, are listening and attending to your programs. If there are questions specifically on consular issues, matters of birth certificate, death certificate, passport, ID, and the likes, feel free to ask. They'll hear and they'll answer, and I'm listening also.
Thank you very much.
I was interested in the registration to vote. How do you register to vote? And where?
Okay, continue.
Thank you very much for that question. Balozi will attend to. Any other question? I think, do you really need a microphone from where you are, or you are able to, you are audible enough?
My question, I have about the passport. If you lose your Kenyan passport here, how do you go about getting a new passport? Do you have to go to Washington, D.C.?
Thank you very much. We'll attend now. Let us take around 4 questions.
Yeah, I have a very sensitive question. There's a lot of frustrations of Kenya in the U.S. Walking into the U.S. Embassy